Good afternoon. This is Devin Healy. I'm unable to be with you all today, so I've pre-recorded my section of this course, and I hope this will be valuable for you. I've built in some time for you to have a little bit of discussion and response to some questions. I'm going to be talking to you about implementation teams, and I'm excited to do so. In my efforts around Utah Multi-Tiered System of Supports in that project and the support we've provided to LEAs, we've done a fair amount of work in supporting LEAs around the state with the implementation teams at the district and school levels to help them in their implementation and sustaining of evidence-based practices. The first question we should ask is, why do we need implementation teams? And I think this graphic gives as good a reason as any. The research from Fixon et al. That we can see here indicates that when there is no implementation team, regardless of how effective or evidence-based a practice or innovation is, if there's no implementation team, typically what we get is about 14% implementation, and it takes approximately 17 years to get there. That's staggering if you think about the time and the money that goes into the effort, that only 14% of it is actually implemented over 17 years. On the other hand, if there is an implementation team as part of the efforts, that implementation increases to 80% in just 3 years' time. So do we need implementation teams? Absolutely. So what is an implementation team? Implementation teams are the people who do the work of implementation. That's involved with the stages, the drivers, the improvement cycles that we have talked about in this course and will be talking about some more in the future with regards to usable interventions. That's a quote from the Active Implementation Hub, which is a great resource. If you haven't already checked that out, it's a great resource around implementation, and it's targeted and tailored to an education setting, so it's really relevant and I think a useful tool. So implementation teams are the who, not the classic rock band, of course, but the who, the individuals who are doing the what, who are implementing, who are doing the nuts and bolts, detailed work day in and day out of implementation. These teams should be organized and active, so it's not an ad hoc team that meets as needed. It's not a one-time meeting that will result in implementation. It's an ongoing, organized, and active team. So the next question we would ask is, who should be on this team? Typically, there should be at least 3 to 5 individuals on an implementation team. Any less than that, if you've just got a couple people, you're not going to see the same level of influence, and you're also not bringing in all the key stakeholders and different backgrounds and perspectives that are important when we're implementing big practices and programs and systems change. You have to make sure that individuals have adequate FTE to dedicate to attending these meetings and complete the activities that are identified within those implementation team meetings. Team members should have special expertise relevant to the practice or the innovation of focus. The team should meet regularly and they guide implementation within the system, whether that be the school, the district, the state. They guide that implementation through the stages that we've learned about in this implementation course. So again, it's active, it's daily work, it's nuts and bolts details, and it's hard work that takes all team members to really be involved. It's not simply giving advice to somebody else that's doing the work. It's not simply a council that's providing information to an individual on that team who's carrying out the work. It's a shared responsibility. As you're thinking about the makeup of an implementation team, I'd like you to think about, for our example here, a district implementation team around a shared initiative, whether that be MTSS or some other major initiative within your district or charter. So if you're in a charter, consider a team that represents the whole system, whether that's an individual charter school or multiple schools as part of a charter. Considering that team, I'd like you to take a couple minutes in the comment box, if you could answer a couple questions. One, who would you like to be on that team? Who's needed on that district level team to guide the efforts of the major initiative that you're considering, whether that's MTSS or something else? And second, if you can follow that up answering this question, why would an administrator need to be a member of an implementation team? In the case of a district team, representative from the superintendency. In a school, that would be the school principal or an assistant principal. But at that district level, why would we need to have an administrator at the superintendency level as a member of that team? Hopefully that discussion provided some thought and some, as you saw, some of the comments and responses of others in this course. We found that with our efforts with Utah Multi-Tiered System of Supports project, there are some really critical individuals that need to be a member of the team. As I mentioned, the administrator is important, and hopefully in your discussion you identified some of the reasons for that. Some things that we have found is the administrator needs to be there because a lot of times questions come up around funding. How are we going to fund these efforts or these individuals or the evaluation or purchasing a new curriculum or a data system? And if you don't have somebody there with the purse strings that can answer those questions, your efforts are a lot of times stalled. The same with policy. Sometimes we need to address questions around policy that will support or enable the practice to be carried out, and an administrator can answer those questions. We also need somebody who's an expert, at least one person who's an expert in the content area, whether that's literacy, numeracy, behavior, whatever the content is, we need somebody that's an expert in that area. And then of course we need department representatives. At a district level, that might be curriculum, assessment, federal programs, special education, etc. At a school level, it would be grade level or department representation, related service providers, special education, general education, instructional coaches, administration, counselors. It's also critical to have coaches as members of this team, both systems and instructional, as is most relevant to the implementation team that you're considering. We know that coaching is a critical, fundamental piece to implementation, and we need to make sure that those coaches are there to help in the planning and the delivery of that coaching around the professional development, around the implementation efforts. And in the evaluation of that implementation fidelity and the outcomes, coaches are often critical members of that discussion. And of course, any other individuals who might be necessary to the work at hand. So as you're first creating a team and you're selecting appropriate members, there are some specific criteria that you should consider in the selection of those team members. We talked about that in our last course, the selection and training and coaching as competency drivers. So selection is critical so that we don't have to put as much time and effort into the training and coaching of those individuals. So we should select individuals who know the innovations, the practices that we're trying to implement. They should know and use implementation science and best practices. And it may not be that they are experts in these areas, and so there may need to be some training around this, particularly with implementation science, because it's a little bit of a newer focus, a newer field that perhaps not as many people are aware of, so there may need to be some training that happens there. We need to make sure that those members are problem solvers. They're not afraid of problems. They're excited about identifying those problems and coming up with solutions for improvement within the system. And they need to have a passion for promoting and participating in systems change. A lot of what we focus on with implementation science is changing the system, the infrastructure, the supports in place that allow an innovation to be implemented and sustained over time. Now, a distinction needs to be made between implementation and leadership teams. And I'm going to be talking about in just a minute what those teams look like and how they communicate a little bit, but let's talk about just the differences between them. A leadership team sets the vision. What's the direction of our LEA, of our school, of our state? What do we need to have accomplished? What are the major goals? What are the non-negotiables? They establish or revise policy to support the implementation of the practice and that vision they've identified. They allocate resources to support that. They're the ones that establish and support the implementation team in their efforts. And they do a lot of the reporting to other stakeholders, to a school board, to the community, and other key stakeholders. The implementation team there's some overlap here certainly, but the implementation team is the team that does the day-to-day work, carrying out the vision that's been established by the leadership. They do the daily, the nuts and bolts planning, the implementation, and the evaluation of the practices or the innovation. The implementation team supports the implementers. At a building level, the building implementation team is supporting the teachers in changing their practices and improving their instruction, their classroom management, or whatever the practice or innovation might be. They should also not just operate in isolation. We'll talk more about this today and certainly in future courses about the importance of feedback loops. They should report regularly to the leadership team to make sure that there's alignment with the vision. And perhaps the efforts of the implementation will guide the leadership team to make alterations in the vision or in policy. So they're being responsive to the practices and the implementation. And of course, the implementation team are also key in engaging stakeholders, whether that be at a community board level, being involved there, involving representatives of the lower levels, whether that's the school or the grade levels, and being that connection between leadership and the innovators or the implementers at that front line level. So this is a graphic from the Active Implementation Hub that outlines the relationship of the implementation teams. This particular example has 4 different types of implementation teams, or 4 different levels of implementation teams: a building level, district, regional, and state level. Now in Utah, we don't have as many regional implementation teams, but we certainly have building, district, and state level implementation teams. You see the arrows there, and those represent the feedback loops that I alluded to, and we'll talk more about that. But you can see it's bidirectional. There's communication that goes from the state to the district to the building. And in reverse, the building is reporting back and sharing information with the district implementation team, and the district is sharing information with the state implementation team. This is an example from the state of Utah, specifically with the UMTSS project, representing the various types of teams and the teaming structure within our project. We have at the top in the orange state level teams. In green we have district level teams, and in blue we have building leadership teams or building level teams.